Who do you have to trade for in fantasy football and who needs to leave your roster right now? We'll go over that in this week's episode of the Fantasy Football Trade Desk. Each week I'll cover some of my top fantasy football trade recommendations, with the goal being to maximize the value of our players and make sure we're putting out the best lineup week in and week out. So some of these recommendations will be for immediate returns, and some of them will be for returns that I think will give us really great fantasy production in the weeks ahead and set us up for good success in the fantasy football playoffs to bring us a championship. If you want my full fantasy football trade recommendations, you can click the link below, which will take you to the article where I have far more recommendations than we'll cover in this video. We'll start with the bad news and go over my sells for the week. We're going to differentiate between players I'm definitely selling and players I'm trying to explore the market on and see if I can get good value in a trade. But we're going to start with the player I'm straight up selling, and it's Chicago Bears running back DeAndre Swift. I had Swift here last week, and I said that you should wait for one good week and then see if you could trade Swift. Well, he had that one good week last week when he put up 165 total yards and a touchdown against the Rams. Coming into that game, Swift was averaging 5.5 fantasy points in half PPR leagues, which made him running back 42 on the season. Even with that good performance, Swift is still splitting work with Roschon Johnson. In the 2 weeks since Roschon Johnson has been back with the Bears, Swift has taken 58% of the snaps to 36 for Johnson. Swift has handled 52% of the rushes to 27% for Johnson. Swift has run a route on 54% on dropbacks compared to 34% for Johnson. So this is not a 1A, 1B situation, but Swift is in a committee. Anytime you have a running back who's handling just 52% of the overall rushes, that's not really a situation that's good for long-term fantasy success. And Swift had just 46% of the rushes in week 3 when he was struggling. So the Bears could go to a little bit of a hot hand situation here. So I think now is the time to get rid of DeAndre Swift as he's coming off that peak performance. According to Fantasy Calc, which is a website that tracks fantasy football trades across all league types, on Tuesday, DeAndre Swift was traded straight up for Brian Thomas Jr., he was traded straight up for Travis Etienne, and he was traded along with Brian Robinson Jr. in a package for Kyren Williams. Now, if we plug those into the Fantasy Life Trade Analyzer, we see that DeAndre Swift for Travis Etienne is a big win on the Travis Etienne side, and also DeAndre Swift and Brian Robinson Jr. for Kyren Williams is a big win if you are getting Kyren Williams. So it's really a good time to explore trading DeAndre Swift. And I think you could even make a trade for future value by trading DeAndre Swift for Carolina Panthers running back Jonathan Brooks, who's set to come back off the IR soon. And that could give you some long-term value by getting rid of DeAndre Swift at his peak right now. The other type of sell is when we run a process on a player, which is when we explore the market to see how inflated the value is for that specific player. So this week, the player we're running a process on is New York Jets running back Breece Hall. Now, I know it's crazy to think about trading away Breece Hall, so I want to make it clear that I'm just suggesting we explore what the trade market is for Breece Hall right now. Many people viewed Breece Hall as the clear top running back coming into the season based on his workload and the fact that he really seemed to have no competition for carries. However, we really need to explore what Braylon Allen is doing to this Jets backfield. On the season, Hall has handled 64% of the team's rushes, and Braylon Allen has 29%. However, over the last 2 weeks, Breece Hall has handled just 53% of the rushes, and Allen has taken 39% of the carries. Allen also took 50% of the short down and distance snaps in week number 4. And Breece Hall was stuffed at the goal line multiple times. So after that game, the Jets openly talked about getting the 235-pound Braylon Allen more carries at the goal line. So Breece Hall is already ceding a third of the carries to Braylon Allen. If you start ceding some work inside the 10-yard line to Allen as well, that's really going to cap Breece Hall's fantasy upside. So again, you're not having to get rid of Breece Hall off your roster, but if you can still find somebody who values him as maybe the top or top 2 or 3 running back in fantasy, it might be time to explore possibilities. According to Fantasy Calc, on Tuesday, Breece Hall was traded straight up for Justin Jefferson. He was traded with Michael Pittman in a deal for James Cook and Malik Neighbors. And he was traded solo for a package of Sam Darnold and Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, that Darnold and Gibbs trade is something that I really think is interesting for us to explore because it really tells us how we can take advantage of bye weeks. Jahmyr Gibbs is on a bye this week. So if the fantasy manager who has Gibbs is really scrambling for a running back and your team is in a good situation, trading Breece Hall for for a package of Sam Darnold and Jahmyr Gibbs could be really good for you in the long term. The Fantasy Life Trade Analyzer says it's a win for the side that gets Darnold and Gibbs. You might take a hit in week 5 because you wouldn't have Gibbs to plug in for Breece Hall, but if you're in a good spot, you could take that hit in week 5 and then reap the rewards of it in the future, and that could set you up in a good spot for the rest of the fantasy football season. So it's worth exploring trading for Breece Hall. Trading away Breece Hall, sorry. Before we get to the players I'm buying, I want you to pause this video, comment below, let me know which players you're thinking of trading away or trading for, or ask me any trade questions and I'll get to those as the week goes on. Like with our sells, we're going to have 2 buys here, and the first one is when we buy a call on a player, which is when we take a shot on a player whose value might not be super high right now, but we think it's going to increase as the weeks go on. And this week, we're buying a call on Green Bay Packers wide receiver Romeo Doubs. With Christian Watson likely out for the next 2 to 4 weeks with an ankle sprain, I expect Romeo Doubs' value to increase in that Packers passing attack. However, I think you still could get value out of him because it was Dontavian Wicks who had the huge game in week number 4, and I think he's going to be the target of many people's attention. However, we really like the role that Doubs has. He's ran a route on 91% of the Packers dropbacks this year, which is the most of any receiver in that wide receiver core, which included Christian Watson before Watson got hurt. The Packers had been lining up Doubs and Watson on the perimeter on pretty much every snap and then rotating Jayden Reed in on the slot receiver role. So Romeo Doubs is locked into a really good amount of snaps in a Packers passing offense that I think is going to really explode over the next couple weeks. That role wasn't great with Malik Willis under center, but I think it's going to be really good with Jordan Love, and so I expect Doubs' value to increase over the next couple of weeks, and so I want to buy shares of him right now. The last trade recommendation I have this week is to buy high on a player, and I think that oftentimes we focus so much on buying low when a player's value is at its bottom, but there's value in buying on a player when the perceived value is high if you think that value could get even higher. So this week, I want to buy high on Cincinnati Bengals running back Chase Brown. Over the first 3 weeks of the season, Chase Brown played on just 24% of the team's snaps, he took 27% of the carries, and he ran a route on just 12% of the dropbacks. But the Bengals lost all 3 of those games. So they came out in week number 4 and gave Brown 42% of the snaps compared to 58% for Zach Moss. Brown also saw 52% of the rushing attempts and ran a route on 33% of the dropbacks, and he responded with 80 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on 15 carries. That was the game I had to blurb for Rotoworld, so I watched every single snap, and Brown just looks like the better back. He has more juice, he hits the hole hard, and he is able to rip off chunk plays 5, 6, 7 yards in a way that Zach Moss is not able to. I think this is a little bit of the situation where it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle for the Bengals after what Brown did. I think he's going to continue to split snaps with Moss, and I think that he's just the better running back. So I think he's going to continue to gain more work in that backfield as the week goes on and could potentially pull away from Moss a little bit, especially as the Bengals feel desperate to continue to get more wins and really recover from that poor start to the season. According to Fantasy Calc, on Tuesday, Brown was traded straight up for Zach Charbonnet. He was traded straight up for Baker Mayfield. He was traded straight up for Roschon Johnson and straight up for Caleb Williams. I really like looking at that Baker Mayfield trade situation because somebody could have a really poor quarterback situation and have Chase Brown as like their running back 4, and they may really want somebody like Baker Mayfield to help their situation out, and they'll be willing to give up on Chase Brown. But according to the Fantasy Life Trade Analyzer, that's a really good deal for you if you're getting Chase Brown. Same thing for Caleb Williams. You could trade him away after his strong start in week number 4 and get back Chase Brown if you're in a good situation with your quarterback room, and then get a potential starting running back in the weeks to come. So exploring the market for Chase Brown right now is something that I really want to do. That's going to do it for this week's episode of the Fantasy Football Trade Desk. As a reminder, click the link below, get my full weekly article where you can get even more trade recommendations, and like and subscribe to get this video and all of our other football content and fantasy football content over at NBC Sports. Happy trading.